everyone, and welcome to Trinity Chambers Black History Month discussion for 2025. This year's theme, Standing Firm in Power and Pride, celebrates the resilience, courage and the progress of the Black community across generations, whilst reminding us that the struggle for equality is an ongoing one. I'm Anu Kaura, Barrister at Trinity Chambers, and I am joined by Oluwapelumi and Adeola of Trinity Chambers also. Together we'll be reflecting on one of those most significant turning points in British civil rights history, the Bristol Boycott of 1963, and how it paved the way for the Race Relations Act 1965, the first legislation of its kind in the UK. So perhaps I can start by asking you, when you think about Britain in the 1960s, what strikes you most about the social climate that allowed open discrimination such as this to take place?
Thank you, Anu. Whilst I was not born in the 1960s, to understand how radical those events were, we need to remember what Britain looked like in the early 1960s. The Windrush generation had arrived just over a decade earlier, invited to help rebuild post-war Britain. Yet, despite their service, they faced open hostility and systemic racism. There were no laws at that time protecting anyone from being refused a job, denied housing, or turned away from a pub or restaurant because of the colour of their skin. Discrimination was quite simply legal. In that context, the events in Bristol in 1963 were extraordinary because ordinary people decided to stand up and say no more.
My father emigrated from Kenya actually in the 1960s, I believe, or maybe earlier than that. And I remember when we were younger, he talked about sort of the discrimination that he and the family were subjected to. And I didn't really understand or appreciate it probably until now in later life when I look back about the struggles that they went through.
You can imagine what it felt like for them coming from a different country, being told that you're welcome, that there's opportunities, only to get here and to face such discriminatory practices. Watching a documentary that Paul Stevenson, who was one of the people who was involved in the Bristol Bus Boycotts, gave was incredible when he was talking about his experiences and how they felt in that time and how you just felt so alone, and you could only imagine what that would have felt like for them. So having people rally round and actually agreeing with them that these practices are not, acceptable and they're abhorrent and they must stop is an incredible part of our history that we need to talk about. Up until these discussions, just like you, I wasn't aware of this, so it's incredible that we're having this conversation and for people to look into this and to see the sheer resilience and passion that these people had for change to essentially create the Britain that we have today.
Yeah, it's true. My uncle used to do the bus. I never really thought about what discrimination he might even feel as a bus driver, be like forward facing as well in different sort of professions and how that affects them as well, and what their proximity is towards people that they might get a bit more of a backlash potentially as well, and how dangerous actually it might have been in that sort of climate as well, being in that sort of situation.
Yes, of course. So the Bristol Bus Boycott, what do you think gave the Bristol campaign such power? Would you say it was timing, the leadership, or the way it brought people together across communities?
I think, quite honestly, it was a combination of all of those factors as well. They operated a colour bar, refusing to employ Black or Asian bus crews. This policy had been quietly accepted until a group of young activists, inspired by the US civil rights movement, decided to challenge it. At the forefront were Paul Stevenson, that you've mentioned already, a youth worker, Roy Hackett, Guy Bailey, and Ragbir Singh, members of the West Indian Development Council. When Guy Bailey applied for a bus conductor job, his interview was cancelled as soon as management realised he was Black. That single act sparked a campaign that would change British history. They organised a boycott of the Bristol bus service, modelled on Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott in the United States. For 4 months, local people refused to use the buses. Students, trade unions and church leaders joined in solidarity. The boycott gained national attention, and even then Labour leader Harold Wilson publicly backed it. By August 1963, the company finally relented, ending its discriminatory hiring policy. The victory showed, for the first time, that coordinated peaceful protest could successfully challenge institutional racism in Britain. Considering how momentous it is, it's for both of us not to even know about it until we started looking into it is incredible, isn't it? Like there's so many doors that had to be broken down to even get to this point now.
Absolutely. And they paved the way basically for the way that things are now in terms of discriminatory practices. And whilst I'm not suggesting in any way that discrimination is all but gone, but there's a lot more awareness about what constitutes discrimination and how we all work to ensure that we avoid that. So you and I were talking earlier on about, application processes and, the blind CVs to be able to ensure that you are hiring the right people, not because of the color of their skin or their name or their background or where they come from, but you are hiring them based on their skills and what they bring to your business. And that's part of the work that has been done in relation to the Race Relation Act and all the other legislation that followed it.
Yeah, definitely. From Guy's perspective, obviously he fit all the criteria. It was just the colour of his skin as well. And it's awful that we still have to do this though to remove that either conscious or subconscious bias in this sort of day and age, that it just still feels like it's prevalent. Yeah. Assumptions are made. We talked about our names when we were discussing what we were going to talk about today as well, and we've both got names that people might consider hard to pronounce, and you were talking about, if you wouldn't mind sharing in terms of how you've changed, how you've dealt with things.
I can't remember the exact year, whether it was 2 years ago now. I think it was Dove or one of these companies, they did an advert about, the hashtag was, I believe it's Say My Name, I can't remember. And I saw that other people were doing it and I decided to do it. And I put my name there phonetically and explained, the whole history around my name and why I'm reclaiming my name, as it were. So my full government name, as it were, just as you introduced me, is Oluwapelumi Amanda Adeola. And when I started off applying for jobs, I found that I wasn't getting any sort of rejection letters or responses, or even, an invitation to interviews. And what I then decided to do, rightly or wrongly, was to swap my name round, where Amanda then became my first name with my middle name, sort of then being Oluwapelumi, but not actually writing the full name, just putting the O in the middle. And I found that gave me some responses, may not have been positive during my application process, but I was getting some response because of the unconscious bias and the assumption that I probably am not who I am. And it's important that we are able to dispel any stereotypes around people's names or who they are or the colour of their skin, and to ensure that there is equal opportunities for everybody.
No, I agree. I think you gave the example that Brokovich,
yes.
You said it is people can still say that name, can't
exactly.
they? You find a way, don't you?
Yes.
So my full name is Anu Kaura, and I talked about the fact it'd been shortened when I was younger, and I've always just stuck with it. Obviously, when I'm doing application forms and things, I have to put my full name on there, but I still catch myself sort of thinking, should I introduce myself as my full name or not? And would it be too hard for people to pronounce or to spell? And you're trying to make life easier for other people around you, but also at the same time, it's that feeling of wanting to be accepted or just to make life easier in a way as well. And so there's no criticism of you when you're saying whether it was right or wrong. There is no right or wrong, but I understand full well why you did it.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on from protest to policy, the Race Relations Act of 1965 and focusing on that. So do you think that the Race Relations Act was more symbolic or genuinely transformative in its early years? And how do you see its legacy reflected in today's Equality Act?
In 1965, Parliament passed the Race Relations Act prohibiting discrimination on the grounds of colour. It was far from perfect. It didn't cover housing or employment, and enforcement was weak, handled by new but limited Race Relations Board. However, it was a beginning, the first legal recognition that racial discrimination was wrong. Subsequent acts in 1968 and 1976 went further, outlawing discrimination in the employment and housing and creating the Commission for Racial Equality. Together, they laid the foundation for today's Equality Act 2010. We had sort of touched on this before, and we were talking about allyship as well. Did you have any particular thoughts on that?
I think what we shared earlier on was that allyship is very important, and being an active bystander. It's no good you seeing injustice and doing nothing about it. But is everybody feeling comfortable to be able to use their voice to stand up for something and to stand up for injustice? So when you see that there are discriminatory practices in your organizations, that you do something about it, that you use your privilege, as it were, to advocate for others. We all have varying degrees of privileges. So don't get me wrong when I mention that. I'm not, I'm privileged, you're privileged. We all have different aspects of privilege, but it's how we use that matters the most. So whenever we see that there is a situation that creates injustice, we have to be able to, put our hands up and say something, do something about it. Even if you are afraid to do something about it, speak to somebody who can do something about it, because we all have that power, or know somebody who has that power, who can do something to make a change.
It's true. I think media now is playing such a big part of getting information out there. So I only really discovered podcasts recently as well, but you can get loads more content as well. You can listen to things while you're travelling now as well. Some of the really good dramas that have come out recently as well, in terms of historical things like the post office scandal or the law change as well, for double jeopardy as well. And in these talks, the sort of things that are being talked about, I think now in the public platform, just means that there is more awareness. But do you think that maybe attracts more racial tension or animosity towards, certain racial groups?
Not really. Everybody can get their information the way that they want. And I said this to my daughter the other day when we were talking about Black History Month. And she said to me that somebody was asking her, can you tell me about Black History Month? And my response to her was, it's not your job to educate them. We all have a duty to educate ourselves. That can't be a responsibility, on every sort of black or brown person's shoulders. There is, as you say, so many resources. If you don't have the time to read a book, you have the time to listen to a podcast. If you want to know about the Bristol Bus Boycott, there is a lot of information about it, and videos and podcasts, as you say, that you can use to gain that information. We all have to make the effort to get that knowledge for ourselves, because Black history is not just my history as a Black person, it's everybody's history.
Yeah, I agree. I love the fact that's what you told your daughter as well in that respect, because again, I was listening to some things and they were talking about it's life's hard enough as well, so why is the burden of responsibility being put more on us as well to go out there and educate people? But then pieces like this are very important, where we feel like there is, some social awareness that we can create in our positions. So how can we as legal professionals and community members help turn awareness into tangible change?
60 years on, racial inequality still manifests in many forms, in pay gaps, over-policing, underrepresentation, and everyday biases like we spoke about earlier. But there's also cause for hope, in my view. We're having these conversations more openly, younger generations are more informed, and institutions like ours are increasingly conscious of their responsibility to lead by example. As we said earlier, education is key. Understanding stories like Bristol reminds us that progress isn't inevitable. It's made through persistence, allyship, and moral courage. As lawyers, we have a duty to uphold justice, not just in the courtroom, but in the culture that we help to create also.
I completely agree. So today, as we mark Black History Month and 60 years since the Race Relations Act, let's remember that equality before the law began, with acts of bravery outside it, from Paul Stevenson's quiet defiance to the thousands who simply refused to board a bus. Their courage changed Britain's moral compass and laid the foundation for a more just society. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to my fellow colleagues who continue to champion fairness and inclusion in every aspect of our work.